Hello, back once again for the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at day 89 for Sunday, March 29th, 2020, focusing on 1 Samuel 25 through 27. David and Saul appear to be reconciled, and the rise of God's king seems over. And now the prophet Samuel is said to have died. Things seem to be wrapping up, yet more accounts of the saga are given. And I will do my best to help keep the timeline of these events straight because they sound kind of familiar. David, here in 1 Samuel 25, has many mouths to feed. His followers are many, and he even has added more along the way. Some of the extra followers include shepherds from a man named Nabal, whom David went out of his way to protect from loss. David hopes that the master Nabal will return the generosity. David sends men in peace requesting provisions, and here is what Nabal says. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have butchered for my shearers, and give them to men who come who I do not know? David becomes angry at Nabal's hardness of heart and feels that his character is insulted. David then says in 1 Samuel 25, 21 through 22, Surely it was in vain that I protected all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. But he has returned me evil for good. God do so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave such as one male of all who belong to him. Thus David plans to attack Nabal's encampment. The shepherds of Nabal ask Abigail, Nabal's wife, to intervene. Abigail comes and petitions David not to attack her husband Nabal. David grants mercy and thus avoids blood guilt. Then the Lord returns one hard-hearted act for another. Picking up in 1 Samuel 25, 37 through 39. In the morning, when the wine had gone out from Nabal, his wife told him all these things. And his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord who has judged the case of Nabal's insult to me, and has kept back his servant from evil. The Lord has returned the evil doing of Nabal upon his head. Then David sent and wooed Abigail and made her his wife. So in a lot of ways, chapter 25 is the story of how Abigail becomes David's wife. Not to mention the folly of a man named Nabal, which is a pun in Hebrew. Anyways, in 1 Samuel 26, King Saul once again is after David. He goes to a place called the wilderness of Ziph. If that sounds familiar, that's because it is. In 1 Samuel 23, Saul almost captures David in the wilderness of Ziph. And while in the wilderness of Ziph, Saul goes nearby to Hachilah. David and his companion Abishai make their way in stealth over to King Saul's encampment, and they have an opportunity to kill Saul. If it sounds familiar, that's because it happened when David refrained from killing Saul in 1 Samuel 24. So, similarly, David refrains from killing Saul here too. In 1 Samuel 26:11, the Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now take the spear that is at his head and the water jar, and let us go. David then calls King Saul from a safe distance. Sound familiar? and shows him the objects that belong to Saul. Saul admits he has done David wrong, familiar yet again, and blesses David. The familiar pattern continues. In 1 Samuel 27, David then decides to go to Gath. Familiar. David already went to Gath in 1 Samuel 21. And again, this is an attempt to avoid pursuit by King Saul. Thus, David appears to be on speaking terms with King Achish, which is strange. Last time he saw King Achish, he was presumed mad. And then Achish even gives him a town to reside in for a year and 4 months. David then fights, quote unquote, on behalf of King Achish, bringing the spoils to the Philistines. And David pretends to be fighting with the Israelites, which he did not. And King Achish even comes to trust David, saying in 1 Samuel 27:12, "He has made himself utterly abhorrent to his people Israel, therefore he shall always be my servant." And there we go. A lot of very familiar happenings, a lot of patterns that have happened before between King David and King Saul and David, soon to be King David, and the king of Achish, and all this area. It sounds very familiar because we're repeating the same pattern over and over again. King Saul will try and pursue David until he no longer can. So we will see that wrapping up the book of 1 Samuel in the upcoming days. So thanks for joining for the Daily Bread Bible Study.